Video number 6 and final episode in my series about the complete rules for Interstellar, the Great Space Exodus game by Phil Eklund and Justin Gray. And to finish this long series, there aren't many rules left to cover, but still some fundamental rules that cannot be ignored. In this final video, I'm going to talk about posthumans. Posthumans are both humanity's hope and nightmare. Hope because, as you may soon discover, the emergence of a posthuman aboard the Exodus is sometimes the mission's last and only chance of success. And so, in a way, it's often that or nothing. But nightmare because a posthuman isn't a human. It's a kind of new species, half animal, half cybernetic, and some might argue that colonizing a planet with a posthuman isn't saving humanity. In short, video number 6 takes us straight into philosophy, ethics, morality, and all those kinds of subjects rarely seen in a board game, so let's get going. As you can see, the posthuman has the appearance of a standard human, the same kind of square card that a player might place on his mat. There's only one such card because there can be only one posthuman in play. This card has two sides, one male and one female, but that doesn't change anything. It's just a choice left to the player who controls it. A posthuman cannot reproduce, at least not in the way that's natural to humans. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. How did we get here? How humanity can generate something like a posthuman? There are two ways this can happen. The first has already been mentioned in my video number 3. It's when a player tries a foolhardy experiment. Foolhardy work cell cards can be recognized by this prerequisite. You can only research and work on such an experiment if there is at least one face-down nugget in play, and out of the cosmos. This means at the front of the ship, which is what happens when the Exodus flies through a particle cloud, for example, or on a player's mat when that player has recovered the nugget from the front of the ship with the prospecting maintenance action. And face-down means that this nugget has not already been used for another foolhardy experiment, because only foolhardy experiments can flip nuggets, and once flipped, the nugget stays face up until the end of the game. Now, let's suppose that all these conditions are met and a player carries out his foolhardy experiment. If the die roll is successful, the nugget is flipped and the nature of reality is determined by the majority of circles or crosses. We count all the nuggets in play, the one you've just flipped, and also all the ones you flipped before. This gives 7 possible outcomes, 6 with a clear majority, cross or circle, which determines the effect to be applied, and a 7th result, which is the only possible case without any majority. 1 circle plus 1 cross. At the end of such a foolhardy experiment, the player who carried it out realizes that the true nature of reality is indeterminate, and then, realizing this, he becomes a posthuman. In game terms, the chief engineer of this experiment becomes a posthuman. That means the player who passed this die roll. And if there is more than one, the player who owns the mat where the experiment is located decides. That's a big responsibility. The second way to end up with a posthuman is when one player has the full collection of 5 augmentations. Here, purple player has managed to accumulate 4 augmentations, and with his cyborg working on this work cell card, he passes the die roll and gains the 5th augmentation he was missing. He becomes a posthuman. And in both cases, what happens? First, the player who becomes posthuman loses all his other cyborgs. A player cannot have both the posthuman card and one or two cyborgs cards. And so, even as an embryo in the jars, he loses his previous cyborgs. And the most important change is that as soon as a posthuman enters the game becomes competitive. There's a big cardboard token showing this on the edge of the game board. By default, it's on its cooperative side, but as soon as a posthuman appears, it is flipped to its competitive side. And we already know what that means, because we saw it in video number 1. There's only one winner at the end, and that's the player with the most individual victory points. Or, of course, there can be no winner at all if humanity doesn't find any habitable planet. But here, the posthuman brings some kind of an advantage because he has the ability to make a troglodyte planet habitable. So it sounds like a dilemma. It gives humanity one more chance to survive, but it adds a posthuman to the Darwinian competition. Note, by the way, that just because the game becomes competitive doesn't mean the posthuman will necessarily win. In terms of victory points, it's still possible for a human player to win. But beware, a posthuman has advantages in the competition. Basically, it works and lives exactly like a cyborg. But first, the posthuman always uses 2 dice instead of 1. His normal die and an additional black die. And every time he must roll a die, for maintenance or for work cells, he rolls both and keeps the best one. Also, a posthuman never ages. He never makes attrition rolls. But this doesn't mean he's immortal. He can still, for example, be killed by a goo attack or if he occupies a blueprint that is destroyed. But still, of course, this is a nice advantage. And note also that nothing changes about stress. A posthuman can be stressed exactly like a cyborg. A posthuman cannot marry a human cyborg, unless if the marital law is polygamy, and this happens when the commander is grey, individualism. Also, the posthuman doesn't need to obey the commander's orders. You remember the regulations and their symbols, the pawn, the diamond and the carrot. For example, a green commander cannot steal a nugget from a posthuman with this diamond symbol regulation. And if the posthuman is himself the commander, he can always use the pawn-shaped regulation. In other words, he can always reassign any avatar or cyborg to a foolhardy experiment or maintenance action or to fight against the goo. Here, for example, if green player is posthuman, he can use all 3 possible regulations. The diamond and the carrot because he's green, the pawn because he's posthuman. Only one posthuman is allowed. If one player becomes posthuman, no other player can. And so, this possibility of seeing the advent of a posthuman creates a real tension throughout the journey. The risk of a posthuman will push players to grab victory points, and this can ruin the cooperation on board. To avoid this, players need to keep an eye on each other's augmentations, and as soon as a player reaches 4 augmentations, he becomes a threat to the group. Ditto if there are 2 nuggets out of the cosmos. In this case, the crew needs to find quickly the 3rd nugget that will avoid a situation of indeterminacy. You also need to know that other work cell cards can turn the game into competitive mode without necessarily having a posthuman on board. These are all foolhardy experiments, half of all possible foolhardy experiments. And if you remember that you have to perform foolhardy experiments to win this game, the probability of switching to competitive mode becomes quite high. A new point again to keep an eye on. This game is really full of dangers. With a deep fake work cell, you can switch back and forth between competitive and cooperative modes. Looking for this card in the marketplace can completely change the balance and philosophy of the game. And I guess you're just now understanding how much some cards can totally change the game on board the Exodus. Yes, some cards in Interstellar are more important than others, and you need to know them. And to begin with, here is the deepfake. With this card, with this work cell experiment, a player can steal another player's medallion, which is already very strong since medallions are worth victory points, but more than that, medallions are also votes and are the key to power on board. And this is also the card that can switch between cooperative and competitive mode. Then here are 4 cards that can flip the learning token to its red-eye side. Learning token, red-eye side, what are we talking about? At the beginning of the game, a token on the edge of the map represents a blue eye. It means that knowledge belongs to humans. In game terms, a player can earn an augmentation token only if his cyborg is present on a successful experiment. But if one of these 4 experiments is made, the blue eye can be flipped to its red eye side. And from that point on, the AI becomes more efficient than humans, and the key to knowledge shifts from cyborgs to avatars. Players then earn augmentation tokens only when their avatar is present during a successful experiment. It may sound like nothing, but it radically changes the way you manage augmentation tokens, which are the key to slenderizing the ship and building shields, as well as being an important source of victory points and one of the 2 paths to posthumanity. And there is no way to go back to blue eye afterwards, except with the deep fate card. Next, here is the reverse engineering work cell. Being the chief engineer on this work cell, you can copy another player's augmentation. In cooperative mode, this is a great tool, a machine for multiplying victory points. But if things turn competitive, this card can change everything. Note that once a player has this card on his board, anyone can come and use it. There is no notion of intellectual property in Interstellar, so think twice before retrieving this card from the market through the search action, because then you'll have to live with it until the end of the game, unless you destroy its blueprint, of course. We already know these 3 cards. These are the 3 pods that allow you to land cyborgs on planets and colonize them. And if you want to go beyond a small insignificant victory, you'll need to colonize at least 2 planets, so you need to have one of these 3 technologies on board. In the same spirit, the next card makes a planet habitable by completely burning out the engine blueprint to generate 2 units of water at once. The dropstone action on the battery blueprint can add 1 unit of water, but if that's not enough, only this deep hot fusion experiment can get you out of trouble. The same if you have no woman on board. Normally, without any woman, it's game over because you cannot colonize a planet without a woman. But there's this hermaphroditism experiment which makes men fertile and thus allows purely male colonization. And for the record, there are 5 cards that can change everything about the Exodus navigation. The first 3 basically free you from the problem of fuel management. With the diamond cable you have an infinite battery reserve which you can use with the ramjet or magsail to regulate the ship's speed. And the other 2, the butterfly effect and the beryllium radiators, allow you to fly through LIC particle clouds, flare stars and debris disks without any risk. There are many other cards in Interstellar, and I advise you to study them before setting off on the great journey. I'd also advise you to take a look at your Cyborgs abilities before you leave. Nanshi removes stress, Wofei always wins elections, and you should pay particular attention to abilities that should be saved for the best moment. Arduina can generate goo just when you're ready to domesticate it, or even Pachamama who can colonize a planet without goo. In other words, you need to get everything synchronized so that she's just the right age when she lands on your destination planet. And don't forget that all these abilities only come into play from the middle of a cyborg's life. That means age category number 5. And only if they have been raised by real human parents, so not if they have just been defrosted from their jar. But nothing is never lost, because with the Extropian Education work cell, you can get rid of the orphan tokens and recover the abilities of defrosted cyborgs. And that's it. We're almost finished. Just 2 things left I must clarify. Here is a list of all actions available to cyborgs and avatars. In other words, all the places to which you can assign your die at the beginning of the turn, whether small avatar or large cyborg. I won't go into much detail, but this table can help you decide what to do with your avatar or cyborg. And finally, let's summarize all the medallions you can receive in the game. This table is also very important because these medallions are the only source of votes on board the Exodus. So keep in mind that the 14 medallions you see here are the only 14 votes you must share between players when electing the commander of the Exodus. 15 with the outgoing commander stars, which also counts as a vote. The first medallion is the most classic and easiest to earn. As a maintenance action, you launch a wisp to probe space and find a habitable planet. The problem with this medallion is that it goes to the last player to take the action, so you're not guaranteed to keep it for long. The next 2 medallions are similar but much more specific. The first goes to the player who discovers an exceptional planet thanks to a wisp. These are 5 planets of special interest to mankind. You can recognize them by the magnifying glass symbol. The living planet, for example, is a Goldilocks planet with 2 water symbols, so it's habitable as it is, whatever the associated H2O token. And so it's a really interesting planet. On the other hand, the magnetic monopole token doesn't even correspond to a planet, but to a hypothetical particle discovered by your wisp. So nothing interesting for the Exodus, but a medallion for a major scientific discovery. The next medallion is given to the last player to send a wisp to a galactic exploration point, which is shown on the map by a yellow galaxy symbol. Basically, this means you're sending your wisp to observe a faraway galaxy where the Exodus will never be able to go anyway. So, it's strictly useless, but it does earn you a medallion. What these 3 medallions have in common is that they are earned with a wisp. You won't get them by exploring directly with the Exodus. Also, all 3 are not permanent. They go to the last player to perform the action, so you can always lose them to another player. Then the next 2 medallions go to the player whose shield is destroyed, usually by flying through a particle cloud. And that's worth a medallion, not only because it saves the Exodus, but also because it earns a nugget. And the difference between these 2 cross-shaped medallions is that one goes to the first shield destroyed, while the other goes to the last shield destroyed. So the first one is acquired once and for all and cannot be lost, and that's why I'm showing it on a green background. Note that a player can never own both at the same time, and as a general rule, you never own two medallions of the same shape. Next, a medallion for the last player to send a radio message to Earth. You remember the little wooden dome sent to Earth after a successful roll on a voxel with a planet Earth symbol. The next medallion goes to the last player to kill some goo. And this is important. You win nothing if you domesticate goo. And it's a kind of paradox because your goal is to domesticate goo because you need it to terraform planets. But no, to get the medallion you have to kill. Then a consolation medallion if both your cyborgs are dead. It's like a martyr's medallion. And then here are the scientific medallions with the foolhardy medallion given to the chief engineer of the latest foolhardy experiment. This medallion is precious because there won't be many foolhardy experiments, 3 at most, since each one consumes at least 1 nugget by flipping it. And the panspermia medallion, which is very special, in that to earn it, you have to send a dust bug to a Goldilocks planet. It doesn't matter if the planet is really habitable, if it doesn't have the right stuff or the 2 required water symbols, but still, it must be a yellow or red planet with no Goldilocks token. Sending a dust bug there is like seeding a planet that could develop life thousands or even millions of years later. So it's a medallion that can irritate the rest of the crew because it requires a lot of effort and is of no use to your current mission. And finally, the Adam and Eve medallions, which go to the first colonists to land on a habitable planet. And even if the colonists continue to age because they lack the right stuff or water symbols. They land on the planet, they win the medallion. The only prerequisite for earning the medallion is to survive the risk roll on landing. After that, players keep their medallion even if the cyborgs ends up dying on the planet. These are medallions with a green background, they cannot be lost. Of course, the 2 Adam medallions are for men, the 2 Eve medallions are for women. And that's it, you know all there is to know. You can play Interstellar, so I'll step aside and leave you to it. On Board Game Geek, you'll find the game aids we've been building together since the start of this series. Links are in the description. So, see you soon, folks. I hope you and your crew survive in good spirits, and I look forward to seeing you again for my next big game with my next series of videos. Alors, salut les amis et à bientôt chez Jean-Michel Grosjeu.